In this video presentation, we're going to take a look at four different areas where children tend to experience barriers to STEM learning. And those four different areas are gender, age, home language, and special learning needs. So let's take a closer look at each of them. So let's explore each subpopulation in a little more depth. Girls are less likely to be successful in STEM topic areas or to choose careers in STEM-related fields than boys are, and the success gap in STEM topic areas gets wider as kids get older. There are a lot of different reasons for this. One is communication styles. Not always, but often girls are sort of less socialized to be less comfortable with raising their hands, asking questions, making guesses, being wrong than boys are. And all of those skills, asking your questions and making guesses and being wrong, are really important skills for scientists and mathematicians. So they're essential to STEM. Learning styles, different children have different learning styles, and oftentimes the ways that STEM topics are taught fit better with certain learning styles than with others. So a lot of times the ways in which the girls in the classroom would learn are not the natural ways that the teachers have been trained or are comfortable to teach those topics. Another issue area is role models. There are a lot more role models of people who are successful in STEM-related fields that are men versus women. So, for instance, there are many, many, many examples of Stephen Hawking's and Albert Einstein's and other brilliant scientists and mathematicians who have changed the world. But most of those examples are men. There are many less examples of women, although certainly there are a few, like Madame Curie, but there are many, many less. Then that sort of feeds into another issue area, which is social norms and expectations. As kids grow, they become increasingly aware of social expectations, including gender identity expectations. So being smart, being inquisitive, being academically focused, being a scientist or a mathematician are all things that a lot of times girls have an increasingly difficult time being able to make that work with the idea of also being female. And then the last is teacher bias, and this is a subtle issue. A lot of times teachers won't feel that they have a bias, but will just sort of unconsciously expect things to be easier for boys or boys to do better on things that are STEM related. So they're more likely to call on boys than on girls, and they are more likely to have confidence in the success of boys. The next population area is age over here on the right. So different ages of children experience different barriers or challenges. When children are very young, they're mostly in the home environment or in a day-long early childhood program. As they grow older, they begin to move through a variety of different environments, and by the time that they're school age, every day they're probably in several different environments. So there may be more or less STEM enrichment inherent in those environments. For instance, if they come from a home environment that's very sort of enriched with STEM learning experiences and parents that are naturally sort of inquisitively based in their parenting style, that's going to be really different than if they come from a home environment that doesn't emphasize those things. And similarly, adult engagement, just child by child, but again, as a child grows, the adults that they're around are in different roles. So by the time kids hit high school, certainly they're going to be having science and math teachers whose job is to be engaged with them around STEM, but at younger ages they may or may not be interacting with adults who feel that engaging them with STEM is part of their role. So that could potentially be a barrier. Also, the ways in which we learn evolve as we grow older. Kids go through a developmental phase when they're sort of around kindergarten age, sometimes a little younger, sometimes a little older, where they ask a lot of questions. And how we handle that determines whether or not the natural scientist in each child is nurtured or sort of squashed. So as kids develop, the ways in which they're reacted to by adults, and the ways in which they learn and take in information shift, and that impacts their ability to be successful. Social norms also evolve depending on your environment, your community. It may be that as kids get older, it becomes increasingly uncool to be good at school or to be focused at school or to be smart. So that can be a barrier that tends to arise more with older kids than with younger kids. And then similarly, as kids get older, they hear again and again that math is hard and science is hard and that they aren't going to be able to do it or that it's boring, and that starts to create attitudinal barriers that didn't exist at younger ages. The next the next group we're going to look at is non-native speakers of English over here on the bottom left. So non-native speakers of English are a complicated population because there's so much variance in where the language skills lie. So a given child is likely to have different levels of skill in different types of communication. So maybe better at reading, but not as good at speaking, or better at listening, but not as good at reading, or better at speaking, but not as good at writing. And so being able to understand the complexities of the strengths and challenges that that child has in their language skills is very important to overcome. And then furthermore, there are different types of vocabulary that we use in different environments, and the vocabulary used for science, technology, engineering, and math are very specialized. We don't often find ourselves saying multiplication or fractions or numerator and denominator in other conversation aside from when we're talking about math. Similarly, we rarely talk about DNA or Bunsen burners, except for when we're talking about biology or chemistry. So supporting non-native speakers of English who may be pretty successful in other areas, it could be a whole different proposition once they start interacting with that STEM subject matter. And then another complication is that oftentimes a program or a school will have multiple different language learners, maybe even from different language backgrounds, and who are at different levels in different areas. So it's really important to assess each child's strengths and challenges and individualize. And then lastly is that having a pervasive language barrier where you're really struggling just to understand and be understood tends to take an emotional toll, which makes it harder to keep your mind actively engaged in learning. And then the bottom right corner here for our fourth population, which is children who have special learning needs. It's important to remember that there's a variety of different types of learning needs, and each one needs and deserves different types of support. Firstly, kids have a variety of different learning styles. There are some other great trainings out there about different learning styles, and there's the sort of old school perspective that there's visual, auditory, and tactile or kinesthetic learning. So that's one perspective. And then there's the Gardner's multiple intelligences, which posits that there are all these different learning styles. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely look into it. There are many different courses that explore it. Individualized education plans, or IEPs, provided by the schools identify what challenges a child is facing and what types of support they need, and set concrete goals for how to move kids forward and help them progress. So if kids you're working with have IEPs, make sure you get them and look at them so that you can align what you're doing with them to what the school IEP says. Physical challenges are also worth considering. If a child has got any kind of a physical challenge or limitation, you want to really make sure that, especially with the more hands-on activities that you're doing across STEM topics, that you're fully integrating and fully incorporating those kids that might have those physical challenges or limitations. Emotional or social challenges can also be a big issue with kids who are anxious, who are easily upset, who struggle with peer interactions. You again want to make sure that you set them up for success in the situations that you create, and try to make sure that exploration-based open experiences as much as possible are occurring. Kids who have learning challenges, there are a variety of different types of learning challenges. that might be barriers. And again, reviewing the IEP or talking to the parents about what specifically helps that child is really important so that you can make sure that you're doing the same thing as other adults to help that child succeed. Cognitive challenges, basically the same idea. You want to make sure that you are on the same plan with everybody else. But with cognitive challenges, also please be careful not to underestimate what a child is capable of. If you find out that they have a cognitive or intellectual disability or barrier, it doesn't mean you should assume that they can't or won't be able to or be willing to try things or engage with things. And then lastly, behavioral challenges. Again, making sure you're on the same page with everyone else, but also making sure that with behavioral challenges that you give the child a clean slate every day, every time you see them, is very, very important to keeping them engaged with the STEM subject matter. We've looked at a lot of different kinds of barriers, and of course, once you've looked at barriers, the next question needs to be, how do we overcome those barriers? So here are some best practices. You'll see that we have over on the left a column that says instead of, and then on the right another column that says try. So these are some ways that you can habituate your thinking and your interactions to overcome most of the barriers that you might experience that we've looked at today. The first is that instead of generalizing, you should try individualizing. And what this means is that instead of thinking of kids as members of groups, like native Spanish speaker or a girl, you want to think of each child as a unique individual with his or her own ideas and opinions and preferences. Sometimes this means customizing what you're doing to meet the unique needs of each individual child, but the bigger thing is that it means holding your mind open to the opinions that are unique to each child. Doing things like asking them to do a pros and cons reflection of something to see what they liked and what they didn't like about it, and giving them the room to be whoever they are, whether it aligns with your generalizations or expectations or whether it's a totally surprising and wonderful thing. Next is, instead of assuming, try exploring. Once again, instead of having it in your mind an assumption of what a child will or will not like, explore it with them. Open the world of creativity and curiosity as much as you can. Encourage questions and encourage open-ended exploration. If a child asks you a question, it's a great chance to explore. If the kids you work with are not asking you questions, then you want to start teaching them to ask questions as the foundation for exploration. The third is, instead of protecting, try empowering. It is common for us to intentionally or unintentionally sort of shield or protect kids that we think of as vulnerable. And kids who are experiencing barriers often are perceived as vulnerable. But instead of protecting or sheltering them from having to do things that are difficult or unpleasant, it is much more effective to empower them. So empowerment comes from either behaving or speaking or both in a way that shows your belief in the child's ability to be awesome and to be a great scientist and to be a great mathematician and to be a great technologist and a great engineer. So affirming words and affirming attitudes and beliefs and expectations are empowering, which is more productive than protecting. The fourth is, instead of answering, try asking. When children ask you questions, it's a great opportunity, instead of just giving them the answer to the question, to help them learn to be a scientist, to be an explorer, by asking the question back. If a child says, like, why is it easier to throw a baseball really far than it is to throw a frisbee really far, then you can say, that's a great question, which is a very empowering thing to say. And then how could we figure out the answer to that? And instead of just giving the answer or saying, I don't know, let it be the starting point of an exploration together. And then lastly, instead of knowing, try wondering. So again, getting out of the space of feeling like you need to have all the answers about the kids and all the answers about the content, try to hold in your mind the space of unknowing. Try to allow yourself to not know the answer to everything. And to be curious and to think about how you would get an answer to something rather than thinking about what the answer must be. And similarly with the kids, with their personalities and with their interests and with their strengths and with their tastes. Instead of assuming that you know the answers to those things, let yourself be curious about them. That curiosity is contagious, and curiosity is the foundational quality of any good scientist.